The Third Side of the Coin, brought to you by XCaliber Coaching and Consulting.
Hello, and welcome to the Third Side of the Coin podcast, episode 9, How to Scale Leadership Presence. My name is Aberle, and I'm joined today by my co host, Tim Wong. Hello, Tim. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Alex. Good to see you again.
So, Tim, tough times require adjustments in the way we operate and interact with people. And in addition to that, leaders also need to be visible and present at all times. Leaders who are present are known to be able to grow organizations and guide teams through uncertain times. So today, we wanted to talk about scaling leadership presence. Why scaling leadership presence is a must in the times of COVID-19.
It's so important now because we've all experienced a massive global shakeup, and we've moved onto a remote platform, majority of us. And whether we'll come back to a hybrid model or a full-time remote operations, no one knows, but it's worked. It has worked. Productivity has not gone down because of going on to remote. People have managed. The other side of it is that workload has increased for a lot of people because of the unclear boundaries between work and home life, which we talked about on our last podcast. So scaling leadership presence, why is it important? Is that now because we do not have the opportunity to have that social energy that we used to have in person, it becomes even more important for us to be in regular communication with other people. Now, this regular communication can be two ways. It can be a very matter of fact where it's a video call and we get whatever we have to get done over and done with. Or we can extend it a bit more to find out who the other person is on the other side of the screen. And that's essentially being able to see who that person is. And that's what leaders do. You know, when you start looking at that, then what is leadership presence? Leadership presence is how you show up to situations. And now when we show up to situations online or remotely, it may be one-to-one or it may be one-to-many. And we don't have control of that. Before, when we walked into a room of one-to-one, the interaction with that compared to one-to-many is very different. And even for the one-to-many, we're able to read the room when the energy rises or dips, or just be able to see how other people are responding to it. So the importance of scaling leadership presence now is how are you able to inspire other people to work as productive as before, to put in the commitment that you expect, and also to be able to be a team player. Because at the end of the day, we are all social creatures. We need someone to be able to give that vision. And if you had someone that didn't believe in that vision, giving the vision, or just reading it, you know, it changes the entire dynamics of the organization and the team that you're working with.
I appreciate your perspective on this. You've mentioned something that is quite important, in my opinion, is reading the energy of the room, because ultimately, when you start talking about the good qualities of the leaders, they're the ones who set the weather in the room. The reality is that reading that energy in the remote environment becomes more difficult without having built a proper rapport with the team or an individual. It is easy to misread what is on individuals' mind, because sometimes when we are talking over video or over the phone, it's easy to misread because you do not have that social presence. And that on its own is a skill, building rapport. And what I'm noticing even as I'm working with some of my clients, that the lack of that skill a lot of times is reducing the chances for those leaders to actually drive the organization and teams forward.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the spot here. It's that social interaction. I firmly believe that leadership is learned, right? And it's learned from watching and observing. It's not learned from reading books. Because if leadership was learned from reading books, then your professors of philosophy or political science would be the best leaders you ever have. That's not the case. You have your best CEOs if they were a professor of economics or business. That's not the case. So when you start looking at it, how a leader develops and their presence develop is how well they are mentored or coached. Now, mentoring and or being coached doesn't have to be in one-to-one basis or in a group basis. It can be also indirect where you're observing. And we do that every day. I mean, what we watch on the news, what we see on movies, what we see on commercials, whatever, we pick up social cues that are either attractive to us or detracting to us. All right. So, what does that mean for leadership presence? Leadership presence is what I call presence of mind. You know, it seems to be like we always like to reinvent phrases to make it sound more contemporary, but it's really the presence of mind. In my dealings with leaders, you're able to see an experienced leader or an authentic leader at what stage are there is their own journey, is their presence of mind, whether they're there 100% with you or whether they're partially there with you and they're planning on other things as well. So leadership presence, if we talked about it as a presence of mind, then being a leader begins with leading yourself first. So if you don't have any presence in leading yourself, then you know your leadership quotient is pretty low. You know, but it doesn't mean it can't change. It just means that you need to put more effort into observing others on good leadership and bad leadership and what you like to take away from it. I mean, I can certainly tell you my leadership presence when I first started was I thought I knew it all. And it was very much a top-down approach, ruled by fear, because you didn't want to feel vulnerable in front of people, because that was the way I grew up. That was the way leadership was expected. It was very military in some ways. But as I progressed more, I realized that to get something done really well, not just to get something done, but to get something done really well, whether you succeed or fail, it all comes down to the leader's presence. And that leader's presence essentially allows you to either inspire people or motivate. Okay, what's the difference? Inspiration, they'll go and do it for you regardless. Motivation is if you don't do this, I'm going to dock your pay, I'm going to fire you, or you're not going to get that promotion. That's the two difference. We use these two terms too interchangeably where we get a bit confused about it. So high leadership presence drives inspiration. Low leadership presence uses motivation as its tool. But you need a balance of both. Certainly, we go for a job because we expect it to give us certain meaning and fulfillment. And obviously, there's also the financial reward attached to it. And that's the motivation of changing jobs sometimes. You know? And you see that with leaders with low presence, their team members will change teams with just the most marginal increase in compensation,
Yeah.
right? But if leadership presence was high, even if compensation goes down, they'll still be there because they believe in the purpose, they believe in the vision.
I do agree with you that the leadership has to be learned. In the beginning of my own leadership journey, I did not necessarily have that high leadership presence, even though I thought I was present. I was present in maybe a lot of wrong ways. But with time, you realize that you have to become the that person who people feel comfortable coming to with no matter what the issue is. I'll just give an example of one of the ladies that used to work for me. She was fantastic. She was just amazing. Her motivational levels were just absolutely top notch. Um, and she reached out to me on LinkedIn because she wanted to somehow approach her CEO, and she was uncomfortable doing that. And she was extremely nervous about even sending him the request to connect on LinkedIn. And what I told her was one thing: if you think about the CEO as a human, then that fear is going to be reduced.
Yes.
Those are the individuals who are human. And guess what? The outcome was so simple. She reached out, they connected, he responded. To me, that is the presence. And in addition to that type of situation, you have to be responsive to the individuals, because I know that a lot of times people are just afraid because of your title to even ask you a question. They think it might be a bother, or they think that the CEO or the COO or any type of high up leader is potentially better than them. And this is not the vibe that an experienced leader should give out. I, as an employee, need to feel comfortable to reach out and say, I need your advice. Would you make some time for me? And that's the problem with a lot of us, that we feel that we're not going to be accepted. And why we feel this way? Well, perhaps we had bad interactions in the past. Maybe we worked for those authoritarian leaders that did not feel as though they could be approached.
What I'll be interested to hear from you, Alex, is like, I talked about leadership presence as presence of mind. Now, and when people are like sitting for interviews, they, when I'm doing an interview of a potential hire, in the list of attributes we're measuring for or looking for, they always ask something about leadership qualities, and I always get a bit puzzled about, well, how the heck do I write that? I mean, the person shows promising leadership qualities. I'm just interviewing them for 30 minutes and I can make that decision. So I usually put that into a different perspective in seeing how composed or measured the person's response is, which then gives an indication of their ability to process information in a sequential way and a considered way that sometimes is needed in times of strife or in times of emergency. You still need quick responses, but at the same time, it needs to be measured and, sensible. So in your experience, Alex, I mean, with presence of mind, do you think that, when I'm sitting for a job interview, what is the best way for me to show that? Or how do I demonstrate that I have leadership presence?
It's a great question, but it's also a very loaded question, simply because it cannot be answered just from one perspective. And here's what I mean by that. When you are interviewing for a leadership job, even prior to that, it's very important to understand what that company's values are, what are their expectations, and then build your responses or stories of achievements from that angle. The reason you want to first do the research is to determine, is that company, meaning its cultures, its mission, vision, is that all aligned with your values? Because if there is an alignment, And of course, you wouldn't know everything from the website. You know, you can do other research and such. You can always reach out to a current employee, just maybe reach out to somebody on LinkedIn and say, hey, can we by chance have some informational phone call? I would love to learn more about the company. But we're talking about the leader who is applying for the job. The key is to ensure that you are firstly aligned, because your presence is going to come out in that passion. If you are aligned with the company, it's going to be easier than to talk specifically about your achievements. If you determine that the values of the organization are potentially aligned with yours and you would like to explore more, then I highly recommend to build. I mentioned stories of achievement, but what I mean by that is tell what your beliefs are in such a way that it is very clear that you've encountered challenges, you took certain actions, and then you delivered results. Results speak louder than just the words or adjectives that people bring to the interviews. What I sometimes hear when I first start working with the individuals who are preparing to go to a job interview, and I ask them this question, tell me about yourself. And in most cases, all I am hearing is the adjectives. I am, energetic, I'm passionate, and nothing is wrong with that, but you want to back it up. Because when you start speaking about the results and how you involved others, on whether it's internal or external stakeholders, and you delivered value to your previous employers or to the customers, that right there is your presence. Now, the question then is, how do you tell them what type of leader you are? Well, again, it's the examples of how you are working with the team, with the previous employer. Can you demonstrate also to the potential employer that you are the one who can solve their challenges? And how do you know what the challenges are? Be curious. You've done the research prior to that, but don't forget that you also can ask questions. So if you are feeling that the more exploration is needed, ask questions during the interview. It's not only about them asking you the question, it's also you need to make sure that you stay present in the moment. Don't expect, if you prepared properly, your mind is going to be intact. It's not going to be wandering. You need to be present with that group of interviewers or the interviewer. You need to make sure you listen carefully and be in the present moment.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, you touched on clarity, being in the present moment, and listening. And that is what leadership presence is. They present a sense of clarity. They're there, completely there at that moment, which means they're 100% with you. Even if the ship is sinking, they're 100% with you, and they're still clear that, okay, the ship is sinking, but I'm dealing with the situation right now, not the drama around me. And then the third thing you talked about was listening. That is such an important skill in having leadership presence, is being able to hear hear on what is actually being communicated rather than what is actually being said.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fine line there. So what is actually being said is my words are coming out and it's just saying that. But the emotions and sensitivity behind it, and we all talk in code, is where the leadership presence, being in the moment, being there 100%, and listening with intent and non-judgment allows you to get to the bottom of the situation. I've seen that in so many leaders that even if I didn't agree with them, I certainly respected and appreciated that time, regardless of how long or short it was, that is given to you.
Yeah,
So you touched on three very important things, whether you are an employee or, someone in the crowd, or they're at the top of the pyramid or the bottom of the pyramid. It's all about the individual, and that's what leadership presence is about. It's about you. How do you lead your life? How do you lead yourself? How do you show up?
Yes, you're spot on. Even though it makes sense, and I agree with you, it's not the knowledge that comes intuitively, it comes with experience. So I would hope that by the time an individual reached a VP or C-level position, they understand the importance of building rapport and also are extremely good communicators. Something else that came to mind as you were talking about the leadership and communication skills is presence online. How do leaders actually show up online? Because they're responsible to not only to their team and their organization, but sometimes their presence could benefit others online. Let me just give you an example. So on LinkedIn, some people go online to seek out those individuals, and the individuals who perhaps post on that leaders, let's say respond to some type of article that the leader has written or posted something, they respond. And what I'm noticing more often than not, that those leaders don't even give the employee a like or say, hey, great idea. They don't respond. And that potentially could give that person who maybe was looking to learn from that leader, it deters them. I know it's little things.
Yes, you touch on the point of feedback loops and validation. So for people who are reporting into somebody, then the validation is always very important. I mean, that's how we are able to have the touch base of how are we doing, you know.
Mhm.
But when you're a leader or the key decision maker, then feedback loops are very important. Otherwise, you might end up in an echo chamber or an ivory tower. And unfortunately, you do see that a lot with successful leaders who, in their right mind, would ever want to challenge a successful leader, although you should. And as an excellent leader, they should also create a culture where it's okay to be challenged. You know, I mean, one of my biggest learnings is that never get intimidated by titles,
Mhm.
because you never know what you can learn. And what you were talking about earlier, you said hopefully by the time they get into a VP or above that position, that they'll become a bit more broad-minded on what leadership is. But, taking a step back from that, sometimes getting to that position, you already need to prepare ahead of time. And that's where I see a lot of mentoring and coaching comes into place. Even when you reach to become in the C-suite or whatever, the coaching is very important because it is a feedback loop. It's a form of feedback loop. It's a form of validation. It's a form of going to the sage in bouncing ideas off, as you mature in your own leadership journey. And that's something where having a coach allows you to, the coach will tell you your form is wrong, or if you tweak it a bit, your performance might be better. No one has that time to talk to you except for someone who is there to do that for the purpose of doing that. I mean, we always hear about our supervisor being able to do that and teammates. No, we're so stretched in bandwidth and work that we would like to do it. Who doesn't want to help another person? Who doesn't want to support the success of your teammate? Everyone wants to do that, but we don't have the time to do it. And that's where external coaches, external mentors come into place. They play a significant part in the growth cycle of any formidable leader or person who wants to make change in the world we live in today.
Yeah, and I love how you are mentioning the problem of the century. You know, we're so busy, we have no time, and of course, you're right. But the coach also is able to help the aspiring leader to understand that some things have to take priorities, and that's one of those priorities is giving feedback to those who report to them. And there's no excuse for not doing that. Coach also can give you or work with you to come up with the ideas of how to do it more productively by prioritizing things that are truly important. And what I'm seeing, and that's why I love working with the aspiring leaders, because this is the time where you help an individual uh, to be molded into a person who then will be treating others right, because it's easy to take on the bad habits from a leader who maybe never was mentored and now they're mimicking because they think that the way their leader behaves or their manager behaves is how they need to do it. And it's unfortunate cycle. What I'm seeing, it's unfortunate. So what happens is that aspiring leader keeps going up the ladder without any type of help or adjustments on how to raise their, let's say, presence, how to coach their employees, how to inspire others, to get more results or motivate when necessary, of course. And if we don't do it early enough, whether it's through mentoring or through coaching, that's when we start seeing the failures. And the failures are impacting not only that leader, but also people who report to that leader. That power cannot be underestimated. It's absolutely important and critical that the leaders are taught how they are impacting people's lives.
Yeah, it's not simply that individual. You just don't know their relationships behind them and all that. That makes it rather complex. And I think it's important also to point out to our listeners out there that leadership presence isn't about being out there all the time. It's not that. It's really about how you show up. And showing up doesn't mean, hey, I'm here. It can be for the introverts in the room. It can be just sitting there, um, totally happy with just sitting there, but at the same time, having the confidence if you're called upon to share your opinion. That is leadership presence. It's not about being out there going rah 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 rah, stepping up and chipping in all the time. No, that's not leadership presence. It's part of leadership presence, but it's only a style of it.
I'm glad that you've mentioned that. Here's the reality of the world. A lot of jobs are being lost. Period. Companies are cutting costs, people are unemployed. And I'll give an example of one of my clients who was working only for three organizations his entire career. And we're talking 35 plus year career at this point. And so what he had done is just like me, he was so in that organization that he completely forgot about his network. So he relied on the network that was there, and neglected others who eventually actually helped him gain another employment. So he was informed that he is going to get laid off. And he reached out to me for coaching, and as he was going through his career change, he realized that he had not been actively looking for a job since college, because the way it happened, that his network brought up to his attention, all three times that the jobs were available. Well, the situation has changed because he hasn't really paid attention to his network. So again, leadership presence is not only about being present and busy within that specific organization, but it's also being connected to the rest of the world, because the world can teach you and the world can help you. The key is that when we work and we're so busy, we don't think Sometimes we think we're invincible. We don't think it's going to happen to us because we've been with the company for 7, 10, 15, 20 years. Well, guess what? The world is changing. It can happen. And everybody is replaceable. I know it sounds a little bit cruel, but that's the case. So what I would always recommend that, and it goes with the leadership presence. Your leadership presence is not only to be there within the company. You need to make sure you keep up with your network because there is going to be a time potentially where you need help from that network. So it's okay to stay in touch with those who are not working for the same organization.
I like what you say, and then especially, you know, the realities of things is that when we're sort of like similar, we put in 100% effort into whatever obligations we have, and that a lot of times for individuals like us, we lose sight of what's happening around us, and it is loyalty. And then obviously organizations see it differently, where if you're let go, it is very unfortunate. And certainly the moment of self-doubt does come up about your relevance to the world, especially at a much older age. And the relevance becomes whether I'm still employable. It's a tough one. It's at the same time, what I'm noticing out there is that there's a complete ongoing systems change. It's been happening. It's only been accelerated by the pandemic that we see. So we're moving from globalization to localization. And with that, there'll be a lot of shifts and there'll be a lot of calls for reskilling. So we had a call earlier this week regarding that. And a lot of people were now saying that if you look at health-related industry, they're picking up as well. So there's shift, and it doesn't mean individuals at their later half of their careers are shortchanged because of that. I think what people are needing now, and it's a balance of both, is both the maturity and the wisdom in dealing with change, which comes from people who are experienced in work, and the enthusiasm and the ambitions of youth to drive innovation and creativity. You need both of them. And that's where successful organizations are able to integrate the different generations within an organization in order to have that performance excellence that you don't see a lot, but you do see it in some companies. So with that, you know, you could say there's leadership presence in the organization, there's leadership presence in a team, there's leadership presence in a community, leadership presence in the individual. But at the end of the day, it all comes back down to you, of how you show up. Because that team, that community, that organization would not have any leadership presence if that individual didn't have any presence in the first place.
Right.
And again, I cannot stress more than having someone to talk to. That's preferably not someone you report to. It's nice that if you have total trust in the person you report to, but conversations like that never goes totally well, in that it always reverts back to work, right? You can't totally separate it. So finding a coach or a mentor outside the organization, it works well because you allocate time, and that time you're totally focused, right? But within the organization, you know, you can always excuse yourself with another meetings and things like that. And there's some things that you may not be privy to talk about within your own team, but outside your own team, that also can work. You know, I never did value the roles of mentors or coaches until much later on in my career, because I was always very curious about, what do you mean by that, having a mentor or a coach? I mean, can't I figure it out yourself? But sometimes you do need someone to talk to. It can provide that clarity that even the most experienced leader needs, you know. And you're starting to see that now across the world, especially with the remote working that we have, which will become a new norm. it's more and more important to be able to reach out to someone and talk to them about it. It's partly to do with mental health. It's partly also to do with the way we think and perform. To generate ideas within you, it's by talking about it and bouncing ideas off people.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, just to add to what you were saying, it's quite important to realize that a lot of times we are stuck in our internal world. The map is not your territory. Your territory has a lot more nuances to you, more than just being a worker for a certain organization or a leader for a certain organization. And if the leaders are not addressing those nuances, for example, mental health, right? You know, if they're stressed, if they're, and of course they are, because they have so much on their shoulders. So many people are looking up to them because they are present. Maybe some more than others or less than others, but it's very important that they don't neglect the nuances that are not necessarily work related issues.
Yeah. And just picking up on that, the nuances is your vulnerability. So leadership presence is being able to look at your own vulnerabilities and being okay with it. You know, you always have vulnerabilities, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that you become a victim or hostage to it. Right. You can always grow, and that's where someone needs to point it out to you. I mean, your mother or your father or your spouse, sometimes your children will point out your worst habits. It's never fun. It's never fun. But at the same time, leadership presence is being able to acknowledge I have vulnerabilities. I know I can be wrong, but at the same time, I'm ready to move on from it and learn from it.
So we talked about the leadership presence in the remote environment, the leadership presence within the team, outside in the community, on the social media. And there's so many ways to be there for people. Ultimately, you know, what is the purpose of the leader, right? You know, the leader has to be able to be available, and find opportunities where they can bring value. So it's not all about financials, as we know. It's also that human-centric approach. And I am a big fan of the human-centric approach, especially during pandemic, because those who report to us also have vulnerabilities. Do we find time or do we find resources to help those individuals? So just showing up, observing who truly needs help and potentially is afraid to ask for help, approaching them and encouraging them to continue growing as a human, I think that's important. Well, thank you, Tim, and I look forward to our next episode. If you enjoyed our discussion, please like and comment below. Subscribe to our channel, The Third Side of the Coin, on YouTube. And to learn more about executive leadership and career coaching, resume writing, and organizational development services, go to www.xcalibercoaching.com or connect with Tim and I on LinkedIn. Thank you so much.